Are the Minnesota Wilds going to continue to roll with Nick Bjugstad as their fourth line center? Plus, who are some of the best duos in the NHL? The Minnesota Wild have a couple that could qualify. We'll look at that and some notes ahead of tonight's matchup against Ottawa today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at a roster move that may stick for the Minnesota Wilds as they brought Nick Bjugstad back into the lineup in his return to action, paying immediate dividends on a struggling fourth line. So we'll look at the merits of either player between Bjugstad and Sturm in the center spot. We'll also take a look at a couple of dominating duos that might just be some of the best in the NHL. And we'll get you ready for tonight's matchup against the Ottawa Senators on the road. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your veteran captain of the show and veteran Minnesota sports content producer. Happy to be along with you on a Tuesday edition of the show, gearing up for a matchup tonight against an Ottawa Senators team that is shorthanded, to say the least. But before we talk about that, wanted to circle back to an interesting development in the Wild's win against Edmonton. We saw Nick Bjugstad make his return to the lineup, and we saw Nico Sturm get scratched, healthy scratch for the first time this season. And for Nico, he had really not been chipping in the points category much at all here recently. And you look at what happened throughout the game. I mean, Dewar and Duhaime both score. Bjugstad with 2 assists. So at that point, you kind of think, okay, maybe this is just what the fourth line needed. And it brings up this more interesting point in what do you do with the fourth line once the season is over. I mean, Sturm is a potential free agent that could leave at the end of the season. Well, he is a free agent. He could potentially leave at the end of the season, is probably going to be making a little more money than the Wild would be comfortable giving him. But just looking at the numbers as well, I mean, it has been a really cold stretch for Nico, who has scored just 1 goal. Well, he scored 1 goal in February, but just has 1 point. And if you look at what he has done, over the last handful of games, he had the 3-point game against Montreal, but followed that up the next game with a goal against the Blackhawks. He has not had a point in 5 consecutive games that he has played. That includes both Winnipeg games, the Carolina, Detroit, and Florida games. Has not registered a point, and in that stretch only has 3 shots. And so I think the Wild looked at it from this perspective. You've got the Kaprizov line continuing to do their thing, and Zuccarello and Kaprizov continuing to just be this insane pairing. And Hartman has had his production dip a little bit, but I think we see that line continuing to be successful, and so you don't really do anything with it, because if those 2 guys are able to continue the scoring production that they have, and then it's hard to justify splitting that up. I mean, maybe you end up making it better if you throw in a different center, but anyway, that line is producing. the Fiala, Boldy, and Goudreau line is, I forget exactly which commenter, but somebody on YouTube commenting on one of the previous Locked on Wild episodes, calling them the BFF line, which I think is sensational. So we're going to go with that. But shout out to the original source, whichever video that that came from for that. So the BFF line continuing to be dominant, and the third line, they're not scoring, but they're continuing to be just this menace defensively, to where they are producing on the other end of the ice when they're out there. And so all of those lines are doing their thing, and it gets to that fourth line, and the production just kind of went super quiet for all of those guys. And as much as this is trying to kind of jolt the production of those bottom line guys, I think it also is an endorsement of what we have seen from Brandon Duhaime and Connor Dewar, in just two guys that are going to work extremely hard, and they're going to be physical out there on the ice, and they're going to really be they're going to be good energy guys that Dean Evison can use. And so maybe not being looked to score as much as they are to just win you puck battles, and to to help out in other ways. But it was the same story with Duhaime before the Edmonton game. He had a goal against the Islanders, and then an assist against the Blackhawks, and then had gone completely quiet up until the Edmonton game. And for Connor Dewar, he had done the exact same. So that entire line had been very quiet for the last handful of games. And so, to see Nick Bjugstad come in and immediately give them a jolt, I think it maybe was a message sent by Dean Evison to, look, if you guys aren't going to perform, we're going to try some different things. And it looks as though for tonight's game, the Wild are going to stick with that combo to try to keep that line rolling, and rightfully so. Now, it's possible Sturm plays because, according to Michael Russo, there is a question with one of the other forwards on the team. Didn't see the name as to who that involves. So Sturm might end up playing anyway, but it looks like we may have an answer, at least at this point. And I know it's 2 games, or it's 1 game so far. We might have an answer as to what the plan is for Nico Sturm going forward, because, I think if you sit Duhaime or Dewar, maybe that answers a question as kind of where they fit in for the rest of the season. But if Bjugstad comes in and he's able to just feed off of these 2 guys, then you ride with it and you just 100% let them do their thing. And if that line continues to kind of pull back to where it was earlier in the season, makes this team even deeper. And so it'll be interesting to see. We'll talk about it as we preview the matchup against the Senators here tonight. We'll talk about some of the things to watch, and that fourth line is definitely one of the keys, because the Senators team is going to be shorthanded coming into this game. So we'll talk about that. We will also talk about the 2 dynamic duos that the Wild have seen on just a torrid pace over the last several weeks. We'll talk about Kevin Fiala, Matt Boldy, Matt Zuccarello, and Kirill Kaprizov on the TWOSDAY special here on Locked on Wild. Football might be over for the season, but basketball is in full swing for both pro and college hoops. From all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, BetOnline.net is the #1 spot for all of your sports betting needs. BetOnline remains the best spot for all of your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline.net is your source for hockey, boxing, and UFC odds, right to the Olympic coverage and information. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action. You can find all of it at betonline.net, where the game starts. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wilds, and again, thank you for making Locked on Wilds your first listen every day. For your next listen today, make sure to check out the Locked on Now podcast. Nightly recaps of every NHL game with analysis from our local experts. Locked on Now is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Continuing today's episode of Locked on Wild, and since it is February 22nd, 2022, we're talking about duos, best duos in the NHL. And you've got the obvious choices here in some of the best from around the league. And, you've obviously got McKinnon and Rantanen in Colorado. You've got McDavid and Draisaitl in Edmonton. But Wild have two pretty good ones here in Minnesota that we've had a chance to watch over the course of the season. I'm, of course, talking about Kirill Kaprizov and Matt Zuccarello to start, and then also Kevin Fiala and Matt Boldy. Now, with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, we've seen it for the entire season. And just look at the production that these guys are having. Kaprizov on pace for 108 points, 40 goals. So he's on pace to shatter the all-time points record in a season for the Minnesota Wild. And he's going to get close to the all-time goals in a season record for the Minnesota Wild as well. But Matt Zuccarello is having a season that is right around as impressive as what Kirill is doing. If you look at Zuccarello's latest projected numbers, 72 games, he's projected for 30 goals, 61 assists, 91 points in 72 games. If he played those same 80 that Kaprizov did, you might have 100-point teammates on that same line. There are not two better players that you'll find in the NHL in terms of chemistry on the ice and just the number of times that they find each other for goals or vice versa. It's a combo that just completely outworks you, and they're getting better as the season goes along. I mean, Zuccarello's numbers so far in the month of February, he's 12 points, 4 goals, and 8 assists, and has only been held scoreless in one game. That was that shutout against the Winnipeg Jets, obviously. But other than that, he has had a goal or an assist. He's had multi-points in all but one of those February games other than the shutout. So he's getting rolling and continuing what was just a sensational January as well, with 16 points in January. And then you look at Kaprizov, and he's doing the exact same thing. 10 points for Kaprizov in February. He has a goal or an assist in all but the Winnipeg game, and 16 points in January for him. So 2022 is just a full sprint for Kaprizov and for Zuccarello. And then you have the other duo that this Wild team has seen come into fruition this season of Kevin Fiala and Matt Boldy. And Fiala is on pace for a 70-point season now in 82 games. Just under 30 goals with 28 and 42 assists is what his pace is for this season. That would be a career high. So for all the talk that there was about Fiala kind of getting off to a slow start, he has found some life in his game with his new line mate, Mr. Matt Boldy. 12 points for Fiala in January, 8 points so far in February. And of course, you've got Matt Boldy, who has 16 points in his first 16 NHL games. He has 7 points so far in the month of February. And line chemistry for those two guys, similar to what we see with Kaprizov and Zuccarello, where they just are relentless and they have a real knack of just knowing where the other line mate is going to be, finding them and capitalizing on it. And so you talk about the best duos in the NHL on this 2/22/22 day. The Wild have two of them, and hoping that they will continue to keep it rolling here throughout the rest of the season. Now, as for duos throughout Wild history, that is a little bit more tricky to come up with. And so, a challenge for listeners: if you have a particular duo throughout Wild history that stands out to you, leave it in the comments or hit us up on Twitter to let us know, and we'll circle back to this for tomorrow's episode, just to see some of the duos that we come up with throughout Wild history. But as of right now, we got two pretty good ones here with the Minnesota Wild this season. We have a very interesting game coming up here this evening as the Ottawa Senators a little shorthanded. So we'll look at some of the things to keep an eye on with Cam Talbot in the net for the Minnesota Wild as we preview tonight's matchup against Ottawa after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And just a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. Taking a look at tonight's matchup against the Senators, and some interesting notes from the Senators themselves in getting ready for tonight's game. Obviously, some things that bear watching on the road is the special teams. Can the power play unit take advantage? Can the penalty kill do its job? The last time these two teams squared off, the Wild had a 3-1 lead, blew it, and then ended up winning in overtime. And I believe it was 3 straight goals in the second period that gave the Senators a 4-3 lead that the Wild then were able to tie up later. But if you look at some of the things that led to them having to go to overtime in that previous matchup, how about this interesting note from the Senators themselves in gearing up for the game? Ottawa's power play is 0 for 5 over their last 3 games, and overall are 1 for 23 in their last 10. But they face a Wild squad that has given up goals on the man advantage in 6 straight games. In February, the Wild have the 9th worst penalty kill at 72.7%. The Senators will likely get some power play chances as the Wild are the 3rd most penalized team in the NHL with 10 minutes, 52 seconds of penalty minutes per game. The Wild's 15 wins in 1-goal games are the 2nd most in the NHL. So interesting that, the Wild do take a lot of penalties. That's not up for debate. But interesting that Ottawa's penalty or power play is struggling as much as it is coming into this matchup, because the Wild's numbers have been substantially better on the road than they have been at home, where for some reason their special teams units are the worst at home in the NHL. I still can't figure that out. But a couple of things to keep an eye on for the Wild into this game tonight. Obviously, it will be Cam Talbot in net. And Talbot coming off of a couple of performances that I'm sure he'd like to have back. I'm sure the team would like to have back. But I think a lot of those issues, not all of them, a lot of those issues were the results of the D pairings being so jumbled and so convoluted. And so let's try this to see if it works. I think having Kalen Addison in the lineup to fill that Jordy Ben spot is going to make a substantial difference. We saw it against Edmonton because despite the Wild winning against the Oilers 7-3, Edmonton had plenty of ice time. And so for the defense, they were certainly tested quite a bit. And I thought they played well. despite just the game itself had just a weird overall kind of a sloppy vibe to it. And I think that was certainly compounded by Edmonton's goalie play, which was just awful. But the Wild did their job despite not having, A-plus stuff. But I think the defense played better because they were facing way more opportunities from Edmonton than the Wilds were putting on net for the Oilers on the other end. So I think the defense looked better against the Oilers, and hopefully they can keep that into tonight's game and try to build off of that performance and gear up for the final couple of games of this Canada road trip that are going to be just barn burners with the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Calgary Flames, who may never lose again. But it's going to be interesting to see how Talbot looks with a little better defense in front of him. If we see similar things that we saw against the Panthers and against Winnipeg, if we see some of that stuff happen tonight, then we can start to, circle back to some concerns that have popped up here earlier in the season. I know people would like to see Capo start again because of what he's done over the last few games, and I get why the coaching staff wants to give Talbot a chance to just get out there once again against this Ottawa team, because with the amount of games that are being played down the stretch, the Wild are going to need to have both guys ready. And so that is one of the big things that I'm watching here tonight is just how does Talbot look? How does the defense look in front of him? I would also like to see if the Wild do, and it looks like they're going to, if the Wild stick with Nick Bjugstad as center for that fourth line, do they build off of that performance against Edmonton? Maybe we don't see a couple of goals, but maybe a goal by that fourth line, and just looking like a line that can push the puck up the net once again. That is another thing that's going to be really interesting to see if they are able to build off that and keep that going. And we don't ask it a ton, but it would just be nice on this road trip to have like a sparkling special teams night. Like maybe the penalty kill goes 3 for 3, or even better, penalty kill is not tested. That would be, I think, the better option, is that the penalty kill is not tested at all. Maybe the Wild get a couple of power plays and they capitalize. Let's pitch a a complete game on special teams against the Senators and see where things go from there. It's a shorthanded Senators team. Hopefully the Wild learned their lesson from kind of overlooking Winnipeg for that Panthers game in which they also lost. Hopefully we don't have any of that, and hopefully it's a similar vibe to what we saw in the game against the Oilers, where they just take care of business and they really don't leave any doubt. It'd be nice to have one of those kinds of games ahead of what is probably going to be a very, very back and forth weekend with the Maple Leafs and the Canucks. But we'll see. It will be interesting to see, what the final outcome ends up being. We'll recap it for you on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Wild as we continue to push the week ahead with some of our other topics that we'll circle back to as the week unfolds. That will wrap it up for today's episode of Locked On Wild. So now that your first listen of the day is done, I encourage you to swing over and check out the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Hosts Steele Roden and Flip Livingstone help you become the expert of your fantasy league. Locked On Fantasy Hockey is free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Just like Locked On Wild, we're available anywhere and everywhere. Make sure to follow along as we keep you up to date on all things Minnesota Wild throughout the rest of this season. We're also active on social media, So make sure to search and follow us on any of your favorite social media platforms. All of it to keep you as up to date as possible on your favorite hockey team here in Minnesota. If big news drops or a puck drops anywhere in the state of hockey, Locked On Wild has you covered with new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.